Big states didn't trust small states, North didn't trust South, East, West, any number of conflicting things. At the end of the day, the best idea they had is, well, we'll leave it up to the state. And we'll leave it up to the state for the electors to meet in their state capitals to cast their vote. Why? Because they viewed that one of the biggest problems that we would have as a burgeoning nation is a president would get elected with a friendly Congress, go to Washington, and change the way you elect the president under federal law, and then we'd have a dictator or a new king. So it was very important that it be left at the state level. You go to Federalist 45 specifically says the states have to play the vital role in electing the president. And that's why we champion an idea of preserving the state power, because over time, we developed the winner-take-all system. I believe we were in the 1820s before it really started taking off, and we can have this discussion for another day, but it was a slavery issue with the North and the South, why that developed. But now you have two states that do it in a different way. And to go back to the 17th Amendment, the Constitution provided two places where the states had specific check and balance. One was Article 2, Section 1. That was they had the sole plenary power to appoint electors to elect the president. Number two, the state legislators were given the power to appoint their U.S. senators, kind of as a check and balance to the popular will of the people. About 100, not to say the popular will of the people is a bad thing, but that's the reason they gave it at the time. In about 100 years ago, the 17th Amendment came in, and that took the power away from the state legislators to appoint their U.S. senators. It took it away forever. Now that power is no longer gone. We don't want to see that go with the power to elect the president. We like the way that states have this vital role. If at this time, states totaling 270 electoral votes come to the table of this and this compact goes into effect, this will be another step in this experiment we call this federal republic. But if down the road it proves that another way or a different way we want to go back, states, pursuant to their unique and plenary power, can withdraw from the compact pursuant to the terms of the compact. So we're preserving that. And we talk about, Athenian democracy and whatnot. That's not what we have in this country, and we'd never have that in the country. The term, the assembly, a lot of states, their lower house in the assembly. In Greece and Athens, those were basically the free men, white men who could vote. They all got together in the town hall and they raised hands and voted basically like a poll. We still elect representatives to act on our behalf. States use their weight in their best interests because you've got to count on a state to act in its best interest. That's the best use of state power and state identity. If a state is being flyover country, they're not getting any attention, policy from the federal government is going out against them because a swing state next door to them has more power, well, I believe they have every right to join a compact to try to do what's in their best interest. So, we can continue the discussion.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Senator, just as a quick, if it were about a constitutional amendment, I wouldn't be here because I would never want to receive the power to the federal government on behalf of how to run state elections. That's just not my wheelhouse of what I think is right. But when we were talking about earlier about the ramifications on New Mexico, as a person that travels all across the country on behalf of the national popular vote, this discussion is the exact same in nature. It's just different depending on what the issues. If you're in Oklahoma and you want to talk about energy policy, well, talk about corn subsidies in Iowa, they start to get a little heated under the collar, but Iowa's a swing state and the first in the country. If you go to Alaska and you talk about, it's one of the reddest of red states, they like the notion of NPV because of the fact that every presidential candidate since 1960 has come out opposed to drilling in ANWR, including John McCain. When Sarah Palin said drill, baby drill, talking about ANWR, McCain backed down his statement and said, well, I think this is an issue the state of Alaska should deal with and not the federal government, which was a ridiculous punt because it's a federal issue and the state can't deal with it, otherwise they would have. 85% of Alaskans support drilling in ANWR. But why does every presidential candidate take a position against drilling in ANWR? By the way, they became a state in 1959. That's why I say 1960. Why? Because 65% of Americans in 49 other states think it's a bad idea. So they like the idea that a presidential candidate would actually have to come there and talk to them because they haven't seen one since 1960 when Kennedy was there. That's why this notion, so it's a very states' rights, what's that?
Does actually Nixon.
Nixon was there also, but
Nixon,
Kennedy
yeah.
was there last.
Nixon made the foolish pledge to go to all 50
Exactly,
states.
exactly.
I would agree with that, but
He
Kennedy.
went to Hawaii, for God's sake.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
But just as a historical perspective, Kennedy was there after Nixon. Nixon did go to all 50 states. But the reality is that state sovereignty that you talk about is exactly why Alaska is moving forward with the compact, because as a state they are ignored under the current system, and they believe under the national, some do and some don't, believe that under the new proposed program that we're saying that they would get that attention as a state that they deserve. So
Point of
Go ahead.
clarification, you would, when you mentioned constitutional amendment, I think you were attributing that to Senator Adair. I don't want to speak
The
for
next-
you, but
the next-
I want to make sure we're clear.
I'm sorry.
County Clerk Lynn Ellens
Oh.
was talking about a constitutional amendment, but not for the same reasons that Senator Adair was saying this is a bad idea. I think Senator Adair, you like the structure the way it is right now. You like states being able to apportion or award all for the winner or some other district or
And I
whatever.
think that I agree, barring some other evidence, that the states have the power to enter into these into this agreement. I agree with you on these states retaining power.
Okay.
Tim, since we're fortunate to have these gentlemen who obviously lived and breathed this issue.
I'd like if you could just put that in writing, tell my wife.
That we are indeed working, yes.
You got that on tape? I need a copy of that sent to me, please.
He's working, that was the Lincoln County clerk.
Yeah.
We agree so far, go ahead.
I better quit while
You're a very wise person, yes, yeah.
Here's my question, and this is not back to the more specifics of constitutional versus state. Why now? When I did research on this issue has come up since 1944, is my understanding.
Easily, yeah.
A lot of introduction of legislation and even some attempts for constitutional amendment in 1969.
Right.
In the last election, presidential election, where the national popular vote didn't prevail, we had a lot of election reform.
Mhm.
After that, HAVA, some other
Yeah, HAVA
interesting
came.
things, right?
Sure.
We had a bipartisan commission, Carter Baker,
Mhm.
did a lot of interesting work, discussion, theoretical, practical discussions about confidence in elections and moving forward in the election process. Nowhere in that particular report, which was prompted by that same presidential election and potential disenfranchisement of voters, was there ever one mention in that report of reforming the Electoral College? So my question to you is, why now? What is the impetus behind this large movement right now?
Sure.
There's a lot of moving factors at play. One of it is the attention people are paying now to swing states. It used to be, no one used to talk about swing states. People would think they would go and their vote and all this would count. And then the last couple elections, people started, when you got closer to the elections, started talking about, well, these are the half a dozen states that are going to matter. Now we're a year and a half before the election, and the prognosticator, the pundits, the talking heads, they're all talking about the 5 or 6 states that are going to be the swing states. So a lot of people are saying, hey, what about us? You know why? And the people are starting to see that there is a difference. The proliferation of information, the proliferation of news, whether it be website, blogs, whatever, people are starting to see hard in black and white on the internet and in conversations that, you know what? About 200 of the 300 million people in this country, their votes don't count when it comes to president. And a lot of it, what brought this to bear were the elections of 2000 and 2004. I mean, we can't deny that those happened. In 2000, you had a very tight issue in Florida. We all know what happened there. But a lot of people miss what happened in 2004. In 2004, George W. Bush won by over 3 million votes in the United States. He won across the board in every demographic. A very strong win for a Republican in those states. However, when it came down to the electoral vote, the difference in that election were 60,000 votes in Ohio, and if I be maybe more specific, the swing area Ohio, which were the suburbs of Cleveland. Okay? So, you had the possibility. That's why Kerry and Edwards didn't concede the night of the election, because 60,000 votes, if that had switched hands, you would have had a reversed, a flip-flop election of an epic scale compared to the little bit that happened with Bush and Gore. So things like that build, people start talking, and the creative juices that come out of people. This is a wonderful country we live in, and people get very creative, and we have the mechanisms in order to pursue that. So that's why this is built, and we're halfway there. There's 132 states totaling 132 electors have come on board. We're halfway there.
But specifically to your question, when you're talking about the reforms that were in place, they were meant to address the issues that manifested in Florida that led to the debacle in Florida, i.e. pregnant chads, dimpled chads, how you can vote, when you can vote. In Oregon, you had time frames that were issued, whether or not you had to be in line to vote by a time, or if you were in line to vote by a time, could you be stopped from voting if the time, like 8 o'clock, for example, is the time. The ballots have to be cast by 8 o'clock in Oregon, okay?
Administrative issue.
Done, out. Now, in the 2000 election, you had people lined up around the block because it was moving west as the election. Oh, this is going to be closer than we thought. Oregon's within 5,000 votes. People were in line around the block in Multnomah County after 8 o'clock, but the county clerk in Multnomah County, Multnomah County determined
That's your state, right?
that, exactly.
It's easy for him to say.
I said we're a little crazy out there, nor can we speak. But they determined that because they were in line, that it would have been a disenfranchisement of those voters to be able to cast that vote because they were in line before 8 o'clock. So when you're talking about Carter Baker, those were the issues that were being addressed, were more the symbolic over the substantive. And I mean, disclosure, I mean, I worked for George Bush on the Florida Panhandle all 36 days post-election in Florida. And so we saw these things, and that's what came out of that, and the Help America Vote Act and these sorts of things. It wasn't really addressing the bigger totality of the issue, the discrepancy where Al Gore got 500,000 more votes than George Bush, and yet George Bush won the presidency. You know, Karl Rove said it best. He said, listen, if we were playing by different rules, we would have run a different campaign. That's not even in question. Next question. Well, the next question became, how do we win Florida if you're a Democrat? And how do we gain those votes? And what can we contest? And so those were the things they were trying to erase in Florida that came about as a result of that.
Let me just make one quick comment about that. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Public knowledge, procedure is greater. Administrative issues are different, et cetera, et cetera. But when you create a compact, do you not create a whole other group of swing states?
No.
No, because every vote in the country will count. It's going to be the net total. It's not just the compacting states, it's every vote in the United States. So it's the national total, the 50 states plus the District of Columbia. That's who the compacting states are agreeing to cast their electors with that result. So rather than a presidential candidate spending all his or her time in Florida or Iowa.
I hear that argument, but I'll go. Yeah.
Great point.
I just want to say that whenever we make, you guys are legislators, you know more about this than I do. Unintended consequences.
Sure.
I mean, it's huge. It's huge. Administratively, Maggie and I could talk to you all day about issues that we have administratively that would need to be resolved with this. You have different states with different ballots, different candidates. Is the integrity of that state's election is qualified as the next state's election, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those are administrative issues. I'm sure they could.
And that's all in the current system as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you create fundamental change like this, you also often don't foresee fundamental problems from it. That's just my point.
The point she's raising
We're gonna
is
spend more time on
superb.
that when I talk, but I can't talk.
She will change, she's right. There's about 3,050 counties in the country, and 28 of them have 65 million votes. 28 counties out of 3,000. We're not talking Harding County here. 28 counties, 65 million votes. And your question is dead on. Will it change the focus? Will it become new swing states? Yes. People will begin to look at how much is the cost per 30-second ad per 1,000 people viewing. And those 28 counties, and then the next probably 100 after that, because 65 million is enough to win the popular vote, even if you have a turnout the size of last time, which was the largest in history. That will become the focus. And that's where, instead of having 18 swing states, which change over time, you will go just to the population centers because your money is best spent just on those enormous population centers.
Can I ask you something on that? What I understand